Hello, I'm William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about a problem that every homeschool family, just about every homeschool family, has to deal with, and it's what to do when we have a child or multiple children who don't want to study. What do we do as Catholic parents when we have a child who doesn't want to study? And when we think about classical Catholic studies, we think about the studies of the saints and wise men of the past. We as parents may have good intentions and great ambitions, but what do we do when we have a student, a child who doesn't want to study? What should we do? Many parents, when they see a student not interested in studies, they begin thinking about what they should do, whether they should continue with classical studies or whether it's hopeless and so on. Um, what I encourage parents to do is to always compare what's going on with what the alternatives might be. And also to consider that positive achievements, however costly they may be, positive achievements are the ultimate measure of any option in education. And we define those positive achievements based on our own convictions and goals. If you read the Catechism, you'll see that parents have the right to choose a school for their children that serves their own convictions. That's the parents' right to do that. And the children's response to their parents' choices um, is a sign of their character. And the children are going, at some point, to some degree, they're going to have to pay a price for not trusting and obeying their parents, but resisting. That's what it means to be a bad student. Parents, when they choose to homeschool, are the legal administrators of their children's school. And just as we would let a school give our children poor grades if they didn't study, we can't be afraid as parents to give our children bad grades if they choose not to study what we tell them to study. But that's really not what's important. What's important and what we should focus on are our goals as parents, our values as parents. And we should ask, will a child in another situation, at another school, in another program, accomplish the goals that we have for education? And if not, then what would be the point of going there? What would be the point of going down that route if it doesn't allow the goals that we've set, the values that we wish to pursue and teach to our children? What's going to be gained by taking another route? And so we should consider what positive achievements might be made, and we should concentrate on those things. I always encourage parents to learn about what's called the preventive method of education that was developed and promoted by St. John Bosco when he was working with boys back in 19th century Italy. It was understood that the boys were troubled kids. They were bad kids. It was understood. They were left to the streets, and nothing good was going to come out of them being left to the streets. Most of them would just end up in prison. And so John Bosco wanted to help those boys, and he took a positive approach. And when I say positive, I mean he focused entirely on positive achievements and just sort of accepted the negative behavior, the bad behavior, negative consequences. He accepted that as being normal. That's what would have happened anyway. But the good things that were accomplished were things that would not have been accomplished the other way. And so what John Bosco said is, if we can accomplish a good thing with the boys, that's worth doing. But the bad days and the bad events and the bad behavior, that would have been present in their lives no matter what. So John Bosco focused or concentrated less on the bad things and more on the good things, realizing that the good things were things that his work was responsible for. The bad things were things that were out of his control. And that positive approach is what I always encourage parents to maintain, to stay positive, to focus on good achievements and to not worry about the bad things because they're not in our control. If our children choose to scoff at good things that we provide for them, that's a decision that they're going to have to eat the consequences of. But for us to allow them to drive the bus, as it were, and force the decisions, that's simply not parenting. And so we have to try to find a positive solution to what would be a problem, realizing that the resistance in a child is not in our control necessarily. And I say not necessarily. I'm not saying that all parents are innocent and everything they do is right. I talk about that quite a bit. Make sure I balance that because there are a lot of parents who provoke their kids to anger. There are a lot of parents who have no idea what they're doing and they don't ask for any help. There are parents who make life miserable for their kids. But there are also parents who are doing the best they can and doing things that are good enough, where a student with a good spirit, a child with a good spirit and good heart would make good use of it, and their children simply aren't making good use of it. And when we have that situation, we have to realize that our children's bad choices, bad behavior, and so on is something that they're going to have to pay for, not just before God, but in this life. They're going to have to pay for the choices that they've made when they're 18, 20, 25 years old. We can't do anything about the bad behavior. That's their free will. That's their choice. We can limit their opportunity to do bad by not spoiling them. But what we should focus on as Catholic parents is what good we can lead them to do by our own effort, by our own encouragement, by our own support, and so on. Concentrate on positive things. I can admit that there are times, even in my homeschool experience with my kids, where I wished I could have just put one or two of them on a bus and sent them to public school. Just distracting behavior, being unwilling to listen. And sometimes this was temporary, sometimes this was habitual. But there were certainly times that I was willing to push that button if that button was available. But then as I think through the details, think about my own responsibility before God, think about my own conscience when I'm 60 years old, I'll want to have known that I did everything that I could, and I'll judge myself for making the best possible effort that I could have made. And when we consider the negative things of homeschooling with a student who's not cooperative, we think about the negatives. We think about arguments. We think about wasted time, wasted resources. We think about negative consequences that the child is going to face that he could have avoided. Those things grieve us, but the child is still in a better situation than he would be in a worse environment. And that's what should encourage us. Even though things are not great as they are, they're still not as bad as they might have been had he been in a worse situation with that same attitude, that same weakness of character, surrounded by worse schoolmates or worse even teachers nowadays. So we have to realize that though the situation may be bad in the homeschool, it's not as bad as it would be in another place, in another school. Plus, in the homeschool, there still are good days now and then. There still are good moments now and then. Still are good things achieved. The children can hear the truth. They can hear us praying, for example. They can hear us reading the scriptures. They can hear us, they can watch a video, hear good teaching. They can still be exposed to good things. And so even though they may not embrace it, even though they may not internalize it, one thing that's important is for us to realize that children, when they're exposed to good education, even if they don't make use of it, even if they don't take hold of it, it's good for them to know where it is, to know where it can be found, to know that it exists, and to know that in the future, if they ever come to their senses and want to amend their lives, they can think back and remember where that truth was to be found, and they can go get it at a later time. I can say that in my life, that was definitely the case. I was sent to CCD classes in the Catholic Church when I was a little kid, and then I wasn't sent anymore when I got older. And when I got into my later teens, I had sort of an awakening spiritually, and I started to think about things, and those thoughts from those early days of CCD class, experiences that I had at CCD, even though I was always in trouble, those thoughts reminded me of where the answers were. And after my return to Christianity when I was around 19, those memories slowly guided me back to the Catholic Church. And so even though those things might have been considered to be a waste of time, my parents might have thought sending me to CCD was a waste of time because it wasn't embraced by me when I was 8 years old. The reality is that those experiences, even though they were minimal, they still were present with me, and they did influence me later on in life. I don't know what I would have done as a 20-year-old or 19-year-old if I hadn't had those memories, or if I ever would have returned to the Catholic Church if it wasn't for those memories. So we have to realize that the positive things that we do, in popular Christian lingo, people refer to it as planting seeds. And, while I don't really like that too much because sometimes it's like an excuse to not do what we should be doing, to justify doing something weird. At the same time, if we're trying our best to do something good and it's not taking root and bearing fruit as we might like it to, we can still say that we are planting seeds, at least, that we hope will germinate and bear fruit later on. So in homeschooling, when children aren't cooperative, we can still concentrate on the positive things, the good moments, and realize that they wouldn't be present someplace else. And we can also look at the bad days and the bad moments and realize that they could be much worse if that child was someplace else. So try to maintain a positive mindset when you work with those children. Try to focus more on the positive things that do happen rather than the negative things that happen, and encourage yourself to remember that the negative things would likely be much worse were you not doing the good that you're doing. I often think when I have a hard thought about God, if something's going bad in my life, or I'm facing some unfavorable providence or bad situation, we're often tempted to have hard thoughts about God and complain. But I often encourage myself by asking, maybe my life would be 100 times worse, and God actually is blessing my life and protecting me from a million evils. And I'm complaining about the one evil that remains. So maybe things would be much worse. And as soon as we think like that, those hard thoughts go away. And I think that's what we need to do in homeschooling. We need to realize that the bad could be much worse, and the good wouldn't exist at all if we weren't doing the work that we're doing. So try to keep a positive outlook, focus on the good, I encourage you to look into the preventive method that was developed by St. John Bosco. You can find some info about that online. I'll post a link in the description of this video. But focus on the good things and realize that those are things that wouldn't exist if you weren't doing the work of homeschooling. And then think about the bad things and realize how much worse they might be if you took that kid and put him in a worse environment. So there's reason to be encouraged and remain positive even when things aren't going very well. So I hope that's helpful. God bless.